Do you think that there is a problem in this country of wealthy individuals and companies not paying their fair share in taxes?
Well, Republicans now have the majority in the House, and the very first thing they did, of course, was based on a lie. So, in this video, I will go over what this is. I will also show you a very somewhat impressive interview that was done by Jake Tapper with one of these Republicans attempting to defend this move, but Jake Tapper helped to expose how full of crap these people are. This, of course, is over the IRS defunding. So House Republicans voted to rescind IRS funding. This is because of what happened last year. The IRS got $80 billion to beef up. The goal of that was to go after rich tax dodgers. Now, to be clear, this defunding is not going to, it's very unlikely it'll pass the Senate. I guess we're going to have to see. I don't think it will. And regardless, Biden said that he would veto it because the goal with this funding is to put money back that was taken away back in 2010. So I'm going to get to more details around all of this. This piece here in Common Dreams does a great job breaking it down. I'll quote it in a minute here. But they write House GOP's top priority, if they get a speaker, which of course now they have one, protect wealthy tax dodgers. So in their first legislative vote, Republicans vote to repeal 9 out of every $10 in new IRS funding. So let's get to this clip. This is Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana. I'll get to more on him in a second, but here he is on CNN with Jake Tapper. And this line of questioning exposes how full of crap these people are, because Republicans right now are claiming that this defunding is going to help the middle-class Americans and small business, when, of course, that is not what this is about. But the questioning here exposes that.
Do you think that there is a problem in this country of wealthy individuals and companies not paying their fair share in taxes?
That has been a problem, of course, but we're not preventing that. The IRS has an important job to go after tax cheats, absolutely, and we support that. We're the law and order team. We want these things to be done properly, but what this provision would have had the effect of doing is making life harder for middle-class working families and small businesses. Full stop. That's what the nonpartisan analysis evaluated, and that's why we know that this was a top agenda item on the hearts and minds of the American people.
Well, why not?
That's why we delivered it.
So instead of just removing the funding, why not saying you can use the funding, but you can only go after individuals who make over $5 million a year?
Look, we're open to a proper analysis and proper instructions from Congress on the use of those funds. And maybe that would be a worthwhile exercise, but that is not what happened with the legislation that passed last year, and that's why we had to unfund it, repeal it effectively. We did that last night. Sadly, it was a partisan, down partisan lines. I wish we'd had some Democrats who followed common sense and went along with us on it, but hopefully we'll do better with that in the days ahead.
But there is no effort to actually make this bipartisan, because even if it passes the House, it's not going to get through the Senate, and President Biden has said he's going to veto it. So if you actually want to make sure that nobody, I'm just going to make up a number now, but let's say $2 million. Nobody who makes under $2 million a year is even touched by this. Why not work with Senate Democrats on something that can actually become law?
We're open to bipartisan solutions if it will actually obtain the needed objective. Look, John Quincy Adams famously said one time, duty is ours, results are God's. We're going to do our responsibility here. I can't control what happens in the Senate and certainly in the White House, but we're going to do the job the American people sent us here to do, and that's what the new Republican majority has promised, and that's what we're going to deliver on, our commitment to America.
All right, so Jake Tapper, I think, did a fairly good job there, but he could have pushed a little harder, especially at the end, knowing that Mike Johnson here is just straight up lying. Because if they actually care about addressing wealthy tax dodgers, which is what that funding, that $80 billion that Democrats passed back in the summer, that's what that was about. If they actually cared, then they would do what Tapper suggested. Have this provision go through that specifically makes it clear that this money is going to be used to address these wealthy tax dodgers. But of course, that's not what Republicans did, because that's not what they want to do. That's their donors. That's why they are going through this process to defund the IRS. Okay, and by the way, it's not just their donors, it's also them. Many of these Republicans, and Democrats as well, but Democrats were for this IRS funding. Many of these Republicans, incredibly wealthy, and I'm sure they do their own tax dodging as well. But let me first show you. So I'm going to get to more details around the specifics around that bill and the IRS and their funding. But Mike Johnson here, so he is, of course, as I said, in Louisiana. He came out recently during all the discussion around raising the minimum wage. He came out on Twitter and said that House Dems, when they voted to raise the minimum wage, voted to raise it by 107%. This exposes not how crazy it is to raise the wage, but how crazy low the wage is, that raising it to a somewhat acceptable level amounts to a 107% increase. That's what's actually outrageous about this, because Louisiana has the lowest, tied with several other states, the lowest minimum wage in the U.S. So they're at $7.25 because they go by the federal minimum wage. They don't have their own state minimum. So $7.25, as you see, many other red states here do as well. Kentucky, Kansas, Iowa, Indiana, Illinois. Actually, not Illinois, sorry. They're at 12 because they're not a red state. But the rest here, many of the red states have an incredibly, insanely low wage, which also leads to, in Louisiana's case, at least as of 2020, they may be second last now, I think. But as of 2020, they were the worst when it came to childhood poverty. So where childhood is most threatened, the bottom 10, Louisiana came last. And as I said, I believe now they're at 49, with New Mexico in last place. Highest for child poverty, or one of the highest for child poverty, incredibly low wages. And the GOP want the IRS to continue focusing on low and middle income people, because when they have less resources, it's much easier for them to go after, the small fish. But they need those resources in order to actually go after the bigger tax cheats that are much wealthier. So more on that here from Common Dreams. As Mechanic, pointing to Michael Mechanic of Mother Jones, pointed out, quote, from 2010 to 2018, even as the IRS received 9% more tax returns, its annual budget was slashed by $2.9 billion, a 20% reduction that cost the agency more than 1/5 of its workforce. Quote, virtually no partnerships were audited in 2018, he continued. By then, with former President Donald Trump in the Oval Office, the kneecapped IRS was scrutinizing the individual returns of just 0.03% of those $10 million plus taxpayers, down from a peak of 23% in 2010. Audits of the 5 million to 10 million filers fell from just under 15% to a scant 0.04%. Meaning, these wealthy individuals are not even getting looked at when it comes to them dodging taxes, and the focus again goes on individuals that are lower income, and because they are much easier to audit as opposed to people that have many more assets. But they also write here, a fair subset of super wealthy Americans doesn't even bother filing. The Treasury Department's Inspector General for Tax Administration reported in 2020 that nearly 880,000 high-income non-filers from 2014 through 2016 still owed $46 billion. And the IRS was in no condition resource-wise to collect. The 300 biggest delinquents owed about $33 million per head on average. 15% of their cases had been closed without examination by IRS staffers, and another 1/3 weren't even in line to be worked. The recently enacted IRS funding, $80 billion over 10 years, was meant to remedy this shameful state of affairs. So, whenever you hear about this sentiment has been going on for a while about how the people that leech off society are the ones that are the poorest, the ones that make little to no money, the ones that are barely surviving. Somehow they're the leeches. Yet here you have millionaires and billionaires dodging taxes, in many cases not even filing, and they owe from 2014 just to 2016 owe $46 billion. And because of how understaffed the IRS is, they are unable to address that. Going straight to the point of how the Republican Party here is just straight up lying about what the IRS funding is all about. And unfortunately, many people believe it. It's hard to get real information out there in front of people's eyes. They assume, oh, because the IRS largely right now is going after poor and middle income or middle class people, that's going to be the focus going forward with new funding. No, as you see from the data, that was not the case when they had proper funding before 2010. But luckily, this isn't going to pass anyways. But it goes to expose how phony these Republican politicians are.